Hi, thanks for joining us on another episode. We're here just outside of Plains at the Boyhood farm of Jimmy Carter. So we're going to walk around. We were here a year ago. This is our first time filming, and it's so pleasant here. I don't even think they charge to get in, and you see the home where he grew up. So I'm just going to pan the camera around. And that's the house there where he grew up. We'll take a look inside. I remember they have it furnished with the kind of furniture that he would have had back then. And we'll just read the plaque here. I won't read everything, but in 1928, when he was just 4 years old, his father Earl moved the family to this farm. The Carters lived here until they sold the land in 1949. It remained privately owned until 1994, when the National Park Service acquired 17 of the original 360 acres. After a multi-year restoration, the Jimmy Carter Boyhood Farm opened to the public in 2000. Oh, this is great. So this is where he grew up, and we got animals on the farm here. Even a cat named Jules. And then, all right. So here's some more information here. A quote from his book. In the early years of my way of life on the farm, we always had enough to eat, but no money to waste. We felt closer to nature, close to the members of our family, and close to God. Isn't that great? And you got some old pictures here. Oh, there's Jimmy Carter at the age of 12, kicking a football in his front yard. That's great. So there's lots of acreage here in this beautiful place. Gonna walk on up to the house. I don't think it was a very big house. So he moved here when he was 4 years old. Oh, that's cute. Picture of him when he was 10, riding his pony named Lady. That's great. I guess there's normally pecan trees here. Oh, maybe these are pecan trees. Nice, and they have a little information here. Miss Lillian would say this was money on trees. Mr. Earl planted the grove soon after they moved here in 1928. Miss Lillian harvested and sold her pecans in nearby Americas. The extra income provided her with household spending money throughout the rest of the year. So I'm guessing either these are pecan trees or they were here. I don't know. It's a pretty spot anyway. All right, now we're coming into the house where Jimmy Carter moved in 1928 when he was 4 years old. I love the porch. Looks like those are I don't know what that is. Maybe it's some kind of washing machine? An old ironing board there. Love these old homes. That looks like it's an old pump for water for the sink. That's great. All right, this is interesting. So the Carters were the second owners. They moved in 1928, and the heating they had was fireplaces and wood stoves. Initially, there was no running water, and electricity was unavailable till 1938. And then Earl Carter sold this house in 1949. Wow. No electricity till 1938. All right, when you walk into the Carter home, you come into a central hall. I love the old phone there. That's great. And then you come into this room. So this was Jimmy Carter's bedroom. It says his bedroom was the place where he kept many of his collected treasures. Lillian Carter installed a love of reading in her children. That's so great. And I'm going to press this button here.
When I was a boy, I was strongly influenced by my Uncle Tom Gordy, who served in the Navy, stationed in the Pacific on a ship. And he would often send me letters and souvenir gifts from China, Japan, the Philippines, other places that he visited. One of the presents he sent me was a small model of a Chinese junk or ship. Of course, that was one of my most cherished possessions. One of my fondest memories was a Christmas morning when I was a little boy. I had long wanted a pony and was discouraged from expecting it, but I woke up one Christmas, I was ill, I couldn't get out of the house because I had measles, and my mother and father said that maybe Santa Claus left me something outside in the yard, so I raised a window in this bedroom, looked out, and there was a pony. I have never been more excited in my life. And of course, then for years, I rode my pony, whom I called Lady. She had colts that I cherished, and it really was one of the transforming moments of my boyhood. As a boy, I was an avid reader, as was my mother. Whenever I was asked what I wanted for Christmas for Santa Claus to bring me, I always said books. Reading was really my major contact with the outside world. You know, what happened in Africa with Tarzan, what happened with Tom Swift and his adventures in scientific developments of those days. It was reading and the books that opened my eyes to the world that I didn't yet know as a boy. That reading habit stuck with me throughout my life, and that's one of the reasons that I still like to read and write books of my own.
I love that story about his horse, Lady. That must have been a nice moment in his childhood when he got a horse. So now we're going to go over here. Not every room has his narration. So this is the kitchen. I love how they have furnished it with furniture from the time. And the old floors, wow, they still look good. So it says that they had a wood stove, and that would keep the house warm in the winters, and Miss Lillian was a strong advocate of eating well. That's a nice old stove. Okay, coming along here. Bathroom. Finally getting an indoor bathroom was a big event in the Carter family. No one complained about bathing in the cold shower with water coming directly from the tank in the windmill. An even greater blessing was not having to walk outside and across the yard to go to the outhouse. Notice the unique shower head, a bucket with holes in the bottom. Oh wow. So that was his shower head, a bucket with holes in the bottom. I bet they were happy when they got their indoor plumbing. That's just great. Love that. One more look at that shower head. Oh my God. Another bedroom in there. So this is the dining room in the Carter house. It's a big room. The kitchen was small, but this dining room is big, and they have a fireplace there. And in the information there, it said that Lillian, his mother, used to do a lot of sewing in here. And then she also, her daughter, let's see, Lillian Carter was not the seamstress of the family. Her daughter Gloria sewed when she was in high school. Occasionally the Carters would entertain and the table would be pushed back for dancing. Sounds like they were a nice, friendly family with the neighbors. I'm just gonna walk over here. Oh, and this is the breakfast room. Oh, isn't that sweet? So I showed you the kitchen already, so this is the breakfast room. These rooms are pretty big. It said blocks of ice for the ice box were delivered from town regularly to help preserve perishable items. Family meals were usually very quiet. Miss Lillian encouraged her family to read even at meal times. So you would have seen the children at the table engrossed in books and magazines. She got Jimmy Carter very into reading, which obviously was a very good thing, and he became a writer as well. All right, now we're in his parents' bedroom, which is right next to the bathroom that I showed you. So they kind of had an ensuite bathroom there, although the bathroom also opens up to the hallway. This is a nice big room. And they had a fireplace. They have a fireplace there. And it says this room was the only place where the Carters tried to keep a fire going full time in the winter. Earl would build up the flame before he left for work in the dark morning hours. The children with goose pimples on their bodies and toes curled up on the icy floors would rush in here on cold mornings to put on their clothes for school. Billy, born in 1937, and the youngest, stayed in this room with his parents until he could occupy his older brother's room after he left for college. That's nice. And that photo above there is Miss Lillian, his mother, when she was 15. I'll just do a close-up on that. That's his mother when she was 15. Nice. I just love how you can come here, it's free, and you really get a piece of history. All right, so the house had 2 bedrooms, and now we're in the back of the house. And, oh, there's a 3rd bedroom in the back. We've only seen 2. I'm going to push the button here, and we get some info.
Before we had electricity in our home, one of our major treasures was a battery-operated radio that was placed in the living room, and we would all sit and watch the radio while we listened to the exciting programs of a very limited nature. Daddy was very stingy about running the battery down, so our time was limited. Most of our listening was in the evening, and of course sometimes on the weekends as well when we were not working. We really enjoyed programs like Little Orphan Annie and Amos and Andy and Phil McGee and Molly.
Well, I must say, McGee, she's here inside.
Usually we all watch and listen to the radio at the same time, but I had a special interest in Glenn Miller's music, which came on, unfortunately, quite late at night, like 8 o'clock. And Daddy would let me stay up after the other family went to bed. I would lie in front of the fireplace. We had a clock on the mantel in the living room. And when 8 o'clock came, I would turn on the radio and listen to Glenn Miller for 15 minutes. One of my most vivid memories about the radio was when there was a heavyweight boxing match between Joe Louis, who was black, and Max Schmeling, a white German.
Here is the biggest show on earth. Joe Louis, the world's heavyweight champion, versus Max Schmeling, Germany's contender. Weighing 198 3/4, wearing black trunks
and it was filled with heavy racial overtones, I guess all over the world, but particularly in the Deep South. As the time for the match approached, our black neighbors, about 30 or 40 of them, asked my father if they could listen to the radio. Daddy approved, of course. And in the living room on the windowsill, he put the radio so that you could hear it both in the house and outside under the mulberry tree. A large crowd assembled out there. In the first round, Joe Louis almost killed Max Schmeling.
5, 6, 7, 8. The men are in the ring. The fight is over. On a technical knockout, Max Schmeling is beaten in 1 round. The first time that a world...
Our neighbors, observing the southern proprieties, didn't make a sound. They very carefully walked out of the yard, crossed the railroad, went to a distant house. They celebrated until wee hours of the morning.
I love how they had the old broadcast from the radio and the fight with Joe Louis, and how he said that they'd put the radio by the window so that their African American neighbors could hear the fight. That's just wonderful. So this room in today's vernacular would be the living room or family room, where they would gather and relax. So one more bedroom. So Jimmy Carter had 2 sisters, Gloria and Ruth, and they shared this back bedroom right next to the family room. That's so nice. Oh, and they had a fireplace too. So their room, oh, it doesn't go through, but their room was next to the parents' room. And it says the Carters were accustomed to the train passing and usually slept right through all of the noise. Sometimes the girls would slip out the front window to sit on the front doorstep and talk. So they were near the railroad here. Oh yeah, I'm going to walk back. I'm going to walk out there and the railroad is right there. What a beautiful room. So this is where Jimmy Carter's 2 sisters slept. Love it. One look at that hallway. It's not a small house. I'd say it's maybe about, I don't know, 1,800 square feet, something like that. I love this living room where they would gather and listen to the radio and I guess play piano. So I'm going to walk out here to the back porch. Or maybe this is considered the front porch. Yeah, I guess it's the front porch because the road is here and then you have the railroad right there. That's just great. So this is the front porch and where we came in was the back porch. And I can hear the railroad right now. Love it. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the tour of the boyhood home of Jimmy Carter. Isn't it charming? I love it. We're going to walk around the grounds and look at some more. But that was, I just love that house. It's so, I feel like when I'm there, it's I'm going back to the 1930s. So charming. So the train is very close to the house. I can see why the girls would have to get used to that. So here there's more info. So President Carter always liked tennis because he had a tennis court here. He said his father was an excellent player He had a wicked slice ball which barely bounded at all on the relatively soft dirt court. This is nice. So they had, whew, that's loud. So this was their family tennis court. Nice to have that right next to the house. One more look at that train. It's still an active train line, people getting off. So I'm inside the Carter store. So they sold things here on their farm, and I'm going to press the button. Get the info.
We had a store, what we call a commissary on the farm, which was quite common in rural communities because they provided basic necessities that had to be bought by the workers and by our family as well. What happened usually was that the purchases were on credit, and payment for the different items were made on payday, or sometimes even at the end of the season when the crops were harvested. The stores were convenient for three reasons. One, they were close by, and most of the transportation was on foot. Secondly, the landowner, the larger ones, owned the store in order to make a profit on items sold. And third, the people who lived on the farm or nearby quite often had no credit rating in time, whereas the landowners that owned the store would know them, and if they wanted to buy a pair of shoes or a shirt or some tobacco, they didn't have to worry about credit because they had credit. Since the landowner knew them well, and since the landowner knew that when he paid them for their work, he could collect the bill. This store was not kept open all the time, but it was open all day Saturday, because that was the day for major purchases. That was the day when the workers were paid and when they paid off what they owed. The rest of the week, the store was closed except when somebody wanted to make any kind of purchase. Both we and they were out of the field during meal times. So almost every time I ever sat down at a meal, someone knocked on the back door and wanted to make a purchase from the store. My daddy would throw the keys across the table to me. I would get up and miss part of the meal, walk out to the store, unlock it, sell 5 cents worth of chewing tobacco or a bottle of castor oil or 2 pounds of sugar, make a ticket showing that the person had bought something on credit, lock the store back up, then go back to our meal. I hardly ever remember going through an entire meal without having to be interrupted to go to the store and open it to make a sale.
So that's the Carter store. I had no idea that they sold things as well. I love the narration in there where Jimmy Carter said he always had to get up from a meal and to go make a sale in their store. That's such a nice memory for him. And I'm walking around the grounds. It's like this is where they had their veggies. So, lots of crops here. His family was very industrious. I guess that's the water tower. All right, I'm at the windmill, and they purchased this from a catalog for $100 in 1935. So they didn't have to pump water by hand after they got this windmill. The power drew the water from the well. Well, that's a nice photo. That's Lillian Carter with Jimmy and his sister Ruth. Wow. So after 1935, they didn't have to pump water because they had power from the windmill. So interesting. All right, so this garden here was Earl Carter's garden. And then his farm supervisor was a man named Jack Clark, and so he was the one who did the planting and upkeep, and the crops were shared. So great how they have everything the way it used to be here. It looks like even the fencing is old. Got your scarecrow there. This is the blacksmith shop on the Jimmy Carter farm. And I love this quote here. He says, "It was a small building with a dirt floor. Our horses and mules were shod there." I don't know what that means, I guess. And maybe put their hooves on, I don't know. And our plow points sharpened. A few of us did this work routinely, but Daddy handled the more difficult jobs. So this is where Jimmy Carter's, and it's dark in here, this is where Jimmy Carter's father would work, sharpening tools and shodding. I think that means putting hooves on the horses, I don't know. But shodding the horses and the mules. And it still has the same dirt floor. This whole place is a time capsule. This is the milking barn where they would milk the cows. And I'm sure it looks exactly like it was. And it says here between 8 and 12 cows were milked here every day depending on the season. This was Jack Clark's job. So he was the supervisor. But Jimmy helped after school and in the afternoons. None of the milk was ever wasted. Oh, that's great. It says this building has been reconstructed, so it's not the original building, but it looks like it could be. So right next to the milking barn is what they call the harness shed. I think this is where they would keep their wagons. And this is an original structure. It says that this is where they would keep 1 or 2 farm wagons, sometimes a buggy, for about 20 mules and horses were kept. Well before daybreak, the draft animals were harnessed to the wagons, plows, and other implements to be ready to work the field. So they worked the field with the horses and the mules, and this is where they kept the harnesses. I love it when there's an original structure. That's a nice picture of Jimmy Carter in 1970. It says, "Notice the tractor. During the span of one lifetime, machines had taken the place of mules. The nearby pump house and buggy shed also stored tools, harness, and equipment." So this is him right here in 1970. So now I'm out in a field, and they've got a lot of old farm equipment here. And it says here, as information about cash crop, this field is a small part of several hundred acres that earned a living for the Carters and the other families who lived here. Like his neighbors throughout the Southwest, Earl Carter mixed his plantings of cotton, corn, watermelon, hoping for a good price when it came to haul the harvest to the railhead or cotton gin. Sugar was grown here and then boiled for syrup. Oh, Mr. Earl sold his Plains-made syrup in local grocery stores. And that's a picture from the 1930s, harvesting cotton. I love this quote from Jimmy Carter. "It was a job for boys and not men, and we despised this task. After a few hours in the field, our trouser our trousers, legs, and bare feet would be saturated with a syrupy mess. He's got so many great memories from here. What a great place to grow up. It's like a young boy's paradise. So now I'm in what they call the corn shelter, where they would remove dry kernels of corn from the corn cob. And I think we're going to get Jimmy's voice here.
Nearly every workday started and ended at the barn. Since we didn't have any tractors or other mechanized equipment, the mules and horses provided all the power necessary for plowing and cultivating and harvesting the crops. Daddy owned about 25 to 30 mules and horses at any one time, a few of which were leased out to tenant farmers who didn't have their own animals. Every morning, Jack Clark, who tended the barn lot, ensured that the mules and horses were fed, and he was the one that assigned the draft animals to the plowman, sometimes including me, before we went out to work in the fields. Although the average observer might think the animals looked the same, all of us knew every one of them by name, age, and temperament. One of my highest ambitions as a little boy was someday to plow a mule. My first real lesson in plowing on my own was in our garden behind Emma, the most well-tempered mule. I don't believe I've ever had a more proud or satisfying moment in my whole life, not just on the farm, than I did the first time I plowed. And I don't even resent the feeling that Emma was the boss of our operation.
I love that, where he says Emma was the boss of their operation, Emma the mule. Jimmy Carter had I think he has a love for books and also a love for animals, which he also got here growing up, his love for animals. And there's a couple animals right there. Cute. Okay, so this is Joe Clark's house, who was the person that helped Earl Carter take care of the farm, and there's some information here. The nearest house to ours between the barn and the main road was the home of a special family. Joe Clark was in charge of the barn, the mules, the horses, the equipment and harness, and rarely worked in the field. For me and the other boys, he seemed to be in charge of everything. Oh, that's nice. And there's a quote there. Whenever both my mother and father were away from home, I stayed with Jack and Rachel, his wife. Perhaps because of this, I felt at ease in the homes of other black families in the neighborhood. My childhood world was really theirs. Wow. So that's Joe Clark's house, and he took care of a lot of the farm. I guess there was so much going on here that Jimmy Carter's father couldn't do everything. So I'm gonna go take a look at his house. Joe Clark. So this is his front porch. I'm gonna take a look at Joe Clark's house.
Perch, catfish, and bass, which we call trout, misnamed by our European kin, or mine at least. I knew that Rachel's folks were brought themselves to be my people's slaves. The swamps and woodlands came alive for me. She taught the way that every person craves to learn. Our creels were empty flour sacks that kept our catch in water, fresh and safe, from water snakes and snapping turtles that would have left us bones instead of fish. Rachel used exactly 7 poles, for reasons I could never figure out. I asked her, why not 8 or 6? She only smiled at me, then went ahead and caught with lark or squirrel 5 fish in one of mine. She made it seem a favor getting home if some of hers would wind up in my side. Those might have been the best days I have known. With my folks gone, I stay with her and Jack. Newspaper walls all glued. Sagging doors stay open, letting flies and moving. I smell the light and feel from the whole floor. Taking care of it.
It's okay.
They always made me feel like I belong. All the food was flying out, so it changed. I never thought our big house on the road would shut. They all knew I liked to be with Rachel Park. I guess my feelings showed. In later years, I visited Rachel's home in public houses. Sometimes I'd find her on the village street. Then, still on the pool, her apron sack. I wrote a poem about Rachel Clark, titled Rachel. My young life, shaped by those I love, felt the gentle touch of Rachel Clark, our neighbor on the farm, whose husband, Jack, cared for the barn and did the kind of work that we boys most admired. He tended mules and rang the cast iron bell that brought him in to sleep, and later told his time to rest. His wife was small and quiet. Her brown skin fixed her in our segregated world, yet Rachel had the aura of a queen. And somehow looking at the white folks asked for her to do the chores around their place, like cooking, ironing clothes, and tending babies. But she would volunteer with quiet grace anytime she learned the need was real. For miles around, the farming folks would know what Rachel did while working in the field. I took 150 pounds or so of cotton if I never stopped to rest. No man could do much more. But Rachel Clark could pick near twice as much as second best. At sundown, we would tie what we had got in burlap sheets and watch the foreman weigh, see for ourselves that Rachel had the most, and if she had topped her own best mark that day. She'd put a lot more peanuts on the stack, pull more weeds, shuck more corn. No one, in fact, could equal anything she did. These kinds of deeds that may seem small to some were big events for us, in which we all competed as our farm life was alive. When the work was done, and when a heavy rain made the fields too wet to mow or plow, and open cotton balls too bad to pick, sometimes she'd smile at me and make them think. Then she and I would leave the farm and walk 6 miles or so to reach a stream she knew. These journeys gave us ample time to talk, or rather, I would listen to her words. And she would think a while and then hold forth about God's holy way. How can we deal with nature and its good to the earth? She'd say that blessings bring on debts to pay, describe the duties of a man and wife, and say the brave and strongest need not fight. She'd tell how praying gave her life a lift, and how it made her act and not just talk, like staying up all night with someone sick. It wasn't empty preaching like in church. Sometimes I wasn't glad to reach the creek. Our bait was crawfish, lizards, crickets, worms, or whatever she would recommend for perch, catfish, and bass, which we called trout, misnamed by our European kin, or mine at least. I knew that Rachel's folks were brought themselves to be my people's slaves. The swamps and woodlands came alive for me. She taught the way that every person craves to learn. Our creels were empty flour sacks that kept our catch in water, fresh and safe, from water snakes and snapping turtles that would have left us bones instead of fish. Rachel used exactly 7 poles for reasons I could never figure out. I asked her, why not 8 or 6? She only smiled at me. Then five fish. Those might have been the best. With my folks gone, I'd stay with her and Jack. Newspaper walls all green. The sagging doors stayed open, letting flies and breezes in. I smelled the lye that cleaned the holy floors. Saving kerosene, we slept at dusk on lumpy corn shucks, not my feather bed. They always made me feel like I belonged and knew what things were better left unsaid. All of the food was plain and seldom changed. I never thought our big house down the road was better. They all knew I liked to be with Rachel Clark. I guess my feelings showed. In later years, I'd visit Rachel's home in public housing. Sometimes I'd find her on the village street, then still a queen, her apron sagging with a can of beer. She'd laugh about what good times there had been and tell me what she thought I ought to do in Washington, where I was working then.
Boy, Jimmy Carter really loved the Clarks. I love that passage that they have him reading here about his love of both of them, especially Rachel. He would go fishing with her and had all kinds of adventures with her around the farm. And he mentions in that passage that their walls were covered in newspaper. And they still are. Wow. The clapboard siding was the only barrier to the outside heat, cold wind and rain, so occupants covered the inside of the boards with old newspapers pasted on with a mixture of flour and water. Wow, so they used the newspaper to keep the cold out. And I love what he says in that passage, that he never thought his house was any better than the Clark's house. And so this was their kitchen, small, very small. And stove. And it leads right out. And there's the train ready to take the people back to wherever they were going. A lot of them just got off to tour the Jimmy Carter house here. How you guys doing? Hi. Sorry, I have nothing to feed you. Aren't you cute? Say hi. Hi, guys. How you doing? You guys look happy. It's a nice picture of Jimmy Carter and Rosalind. I love this. It says Rosalind and Jimmy Carter promoted tree farming in the 80s. Farmers like the Carter have planted so many trees that today more pines grow in Georgia than 100 years ago. With more acres of commercial forest than any other state, timber is one of Georgia's most profitable agricultural crops. That's nice. They've planted more trees here, and now Georgia has more trees than 100 years ago. That's great. All right, they call this the haunted house. We're just down the road from Jimmy Carter's childhood home, which is just down there in the cemetery where you see that car turning in. So this house, I don't know why they call it the haunted house. It says on the guide, it says many tales of hauntings and ghosts are still told by locals. Well, it looks abandoned, so that might be why it looks haunted. But this is an important house because this is where Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, they rented this home from 1955 to 1961. Remember, he came home from his naval career when his father died in 53. So he and Rosalind, they lived in government housing in the town, and we'll show you that. But they lived here from 55 to 61 until their house was ready, because they had that built, so the house where they still are now. So they rented this house for a while. I'll just kind of zoom in there. Looks pretty. You can kind of go through the metal fencing. Looks like a nice house. So this is where they lived when he came back from his naval career, and until 6 years they were here, until he could they purchased that land until he could get his house ready, because they had that built just for them, the house where Jimmy Carter is still today. But this was where they lived for 6 years. Looks like a nice house. Looks like it's maybe falling into a bit of disrepair. But it's not far from the town, and it's not far from his childhood home. Everything is close by here. More look at that house where they rented from 55 to 61. Looks pretty. It looks like there's some kind of structure falling apart down there. All right, we're on the road going back to Plains, and you can see what it looks like, what Jimmy Carter's house looks like from the road, and it's right there. Right there. So you can see it's kind of, he's kind of on a somewhat busy street. And these are his neighbors. Just average, normal people's kind of houses here. That's a small house. And now we're going to look to see where he lived in 1953 when he came back to Plains after his naval career. And it was right in this development here, which was government housing back then, and I think it's still government housing. Yeah, it's right here. We're just going to pull up. And they have a historical plaque right there. So Jimmy and Rosalind lived there for a couple years, and then after that they moved to that haunted house along the road.